Time now for our rants and raves, starting with Dan Kennedy, I think.
Oh, flip a coin?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a rant for the New York Times, which earlier this week ran a story on women who drop out of the workforce, and they do so for reasons that are different for the reasons that men drop out of the workforce. And the lead subject was a 31-year-old African-American woman, big picture of her. And then below it, it says, at 31 with 2 children, okay, there she is, she's 31. She doesn't turn her nose up at jobs that are considered women's work. She hasn't been swallowed by the wildfire of opioid addiction, dogged by a brush with the law, or sidelined by a disability. So we have to establish right up front that we're writing about an African-American woman. So she dropped out of the workforce, but she's not on drugs and she didn't break the law. I don't think that this was deliberately offensive, but it was offensive nevertheless.
I was offended also, but maybe for another reason, because I read that entire article, and it was totally unclear to me. Maybe they didn't want to say how she supports herself. I mean, is it the mother's disability? She was taking care of her mother.
Yes.
Did she have welfare? I mean, if she did, why not say that? I mean, well, what was the deal there? She dropped out of the workforce. How did she support herself?
I'd say this one they should have waited another week before running this story. Do a little more reporting, a little more editing.
Not have a good week with stereotypes.
Oh, yeah, because
the other thing
story about the dads.
Yeah, they did a story about the Women's March and about the town, Montclair, the very liberal town in New Jersey, where apparently a lot of Times reporters lived, where all the women went to the march and the dads had to take care of the kids and take them to their dance classes. Oh my gosh, newsflash! You know,
They did apologize for that.
They did.
I know we were going to mention that in the earlier piece, but it felt like it was just sort of a shoehorn to push that in there. But yeah, they ended up doing a headline apologizing for that story because it was just
ridiculous.
It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Outrageous, exactly. All right, Callie.
Well, this is perfect timing. BuzzFeed, well, you know, our president has called BuzzFeed a failing pile of garbage. They made T-shirts out of it and made money off of it. Anyway, BuzzFeed has hired a reporter solely to cover Trump's relationship with the media. And the editor said, you know, after looking at what's just happened, we realize it can't be just a part of some other stuff. It will be, of course, but we're just going to hire this guy, and he's coming from the Wall Street Journal, Stephen Perlberg, and this is his sole job, just to trace the relationship between the media and President Trump, because it's, well, how many times have we said unprecedented, never happened before, don't get it, lies, falsehood, whatever. So that's going to be his whole job.
Well, we were saying today, I mean, how many Beat the Presses have we done in the past year, maybe year and a half, where Trump's relationship with the media hasn't been a part of the discussion? I mean, we could go months and months without mentioning anything with President Obama. But I don't know if we'll ever be able to do it.
No. Well, now there's a guy doing this full time. This is his job for BuzzFeed.
They might have to hire a second person.
They need one of us.
Okay.
I'm teaching an ethics course this semester. I told my students, I don't want to turn this into the Trump show every Wednesday night, but it's unavoidable that we're not going to have to deal with at least some aspect of it during the class. It's on and on.
I wonder
and
if he'll
on.
also be critical of the media, because I'll be honest, I thought that David Muir piece the other night was very weak. I mean, they probably slapped it together, and David seemed a little bit ill-prepared and nervous. He was reading the questions, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good television, and it wasn't a good interview.
Well, we'll see. But his role seems to be just to be covering straight on the relationship, but it may end up being some part of media criticism as well about how we interact with him.
They need one of us to join on.
No kidding. Okay.
All right, Dan Lothian.
Rant for what's happened at the Dallas Morning News, a wonderful paper. One of my best friends has worked there for years. They laid off, will be laying off about a dozen or so, rather 24 workers there. They're outsourcing the design of their paper, and they're moving, as many newspapers are, to more digital to a more digital platform. We know that it's hard for newspapers to make money these days, and we understand the economics and why more and more of this is happening. But I think when you see the cutbacks, and when you're old school and you enjoy getting up in the morning and holding a newspaper and drinking coffee, it's tough to watch a newspaper, lay people off, and the way that they followed up with it is saying, we believe that this is kind of where it's going, that they'll have a weekend paper, but they probably won't have. And the online is going well, and that's kind of where it is. But still, there's something that's being lost with the actual newspaper, and I know I get a lot of my news online, but I still am old school. I like to hold the paper, and it's a different kind of journalist that they're looking for now, not just one that can go out and dig up stories, but one who can shoot and edit and tweet and do all these things. Not knocking that at all, but the model, none of them well. But the industry is moving in a different direction, but it's sad to see the old go.
I agree. All right, Joanna.
All right, I got a story for Callie's new favorite reporter. Now, I have a rave for a really interesting piece of media criticism that came in the form of a tweet storm, which is kind of the medium of the moment, by a guy named Vivek Murtha, I think. Yeah. He's a conservative writer. He writes, a historian. He writes for The Federalist, a conservative website. And he had a critique of the way that the mainstream media is covering the protests against Trump versus the Tea Party protest against Obama. And the word they use now, the word that's being used in a lot of headlines is resistance, as opposed to opposition. And he makes a really interesting, thought-provoking argument that resistance is something you do against the Vichy government in France. It's not necessarily something you do in the system that you are still a part of, but also that resistance suggests something noble. It suggests a greater cause. Nobody applied that in the mainstream media in a broad way to the Tea Party, but they probably saw themselves as doing that. So it's just worth thinking about. The words we use have meaning.
Yeah, the language definitely has. Speaking of language, I have a general rant for a lot of the coverage this week in the media about the legislative pay raises. I mean, the language was so charged, ramming it through the legislature, jamming it through the legislature. It was a pay grab. The stipends were hefty. I have this theory that, everybody wants a raise for themselves, but there is no one in the world who resists or resents a raise more than journalists for someone else. They just can't see it for anyone except themselves. And I thought that the language, and you can argue whether you thought this was right or not, but it was clear where journalists came down on this thing. And by the way, they had to ram it through because there was no way there was going to get so much resistance in so many quarters, including from all the newspapers who all editorialized against it. It's been 32 years, since 1982, I should say, since some of these stipends have been increased. I guess I'm tipping my hand. I don't see the outrage also, but I was more outraged by the language.
The people who are really underpaid are the rank-and-file legislators without leadership stipends, and they're not getting anything.
No, I know. I understand, and that's the other thing. Everybody should be in on it if you're going to give it to some of them, but we malign our elected officials to the point where I don't know why anybody does it.
But isn't this the kind of colorful language that you use in stories all the time? You might water down, not use, and then an editor will say, put this word in there, it makes it strong.
It's not a pay grab.
I mean, there are all these words. In some stories, they'll do that. I've had that happen where, editor will say, put this word in there, make it stronger.